I never thought I'd hear that name again. Not after New Year's Eve 1977, when 6-year-old Emma Clarke disappeared from the heart of Times Square, and they dragged me, a homeless man trying to help, through those neon-lit streets in handcuffs. I can still smell the wet asphalt mixed with hot dogs and cheap perfume, hear the countdown echoing between the buildings. See the panic spreading through the crowd like wildfire, feel the cold metal biting into my wrists as flashbulbs exploded in my face. They called me a monster, a predator hiding in plain sight. I lost the last shred of dignity I had, spent 3 months in jail before they let me go for lack of evidence. For 47 years, I lived on those same streets where mothers would grab their children and cross to the other side when they saw me coming. But last month, on my deathbed at St. Vincent's Hospital, a woman walked into my room, middle-aged, confident, with 3 small freckles forming a perfect triangle just below her left ear, the same pattern I'd seen that night when I tried to help her find her parents. She held my hand and whispered, "I remember you tried to save me." That's when I realized the person who took her had been standing right there, watching me get arrested the whole time. I've covered missing children cases for over 15 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I discovered about the 1977 Times Square vanishing. See, we all think we know how these stories end. A child disappears, police arrest a suspect, case goes cold, family never gets answers. That's the pattern, right? But what if I told you that sometimes the person everyone blamed was actually trying to save the child? And what if the real monster stood in that crowd, watching an innocent man get destroyed and walked away free? On New Year's Eve 1977, 6-year-old Emma Clarke vanished from Times Square in front of 500,000 people. Within hours, police had their suspect, a homeless man named Michael Porter who'd been seen talking to her. The media crucified him. The city wanted blood, and for 47 years, Porter lived as the man who supposedly destroyed a family. But here's what nobody knew. What nobody could have known until last month, when a woman walked into a hospital room and said 5 words that changed everything. "I remember you tried to save me." What happened that night in Times Square wasn't what anyone thought. The truth, the real truth, was buried for nearly 5 decades, and when it finally came to light, it revealed something far more terrifying than a random abduction. It showed us how easy it is to destroy an innocent person, how we see what we want to see, and how the real predators know exactly how to blend in. This is the story of Emma Clarke. This is the story of Michael Porter, and this is a reminder that in missing children cases, the first person blamed is not always the guilty one. Times Square on New Year's Eve 1977 was pure chaos, the kind of beautiful, electric chaos that only New York City can create. We're talking about over 500,000 people crammed into a few city blocks, everyone desperate to forget the nightmare year they just survived, the Son of Sam murders that terrorized the city all summer, the blackout in July that turned Manhattan into a war zone, the financial crisis that nearly bankrupted New York. People wanted to celebrate, to feel alive again, to believe that 1978 would be better. The Clarke family was right there in the middle of it all. David, Margaret, their 9-year-old son Tommy, and 6-year-old Emma, experiencing her first Times Square countdown. I've studied the weather reports from that night, talked to people who were there, reviewed every police document I could find. The temperature was 28 degrees, cold enough that everyone's breath formed little clouds in the neon-lit air. The smell was quintessential New York. Hot pretzels from street vendors, roasted chestnuts, cigarette smoke mixing with cheap cologne, and that distinct subway smell that clung to everyone's winter coats. Emma was holding a small American flag someone had given her. Witnesses remember that detail clearly. She was wearing a pink puffy jacket, her blonde hair in 2 braids, excited and overwhelmed by the noise and lights and energy of it all. What the Clarke family did not know, what nobody could have known, was that in a crowd of 500,000 people, at least one person wasn't there to celebrate. Someone was hunting, and in the crush of bodies, the noise, the countdown getting closer to midnight, it would be so easy for a small child to simply disappear. That's the thing about crowded places. We feel safe because there are so many people around, but predators know that crowds are perfect camouflage. Everyone's looking up at the ball, listening to the countdown, focused on the spectacle. nobody's watching the children closely enough. At 11:47 p.m., just 13 minutes before midnight, Margaret Clarke turned around to check on Emma. You know that feeling, right? That sudden cold drop in your stomach when you reach for a child's hand, and it's not there. Emma had been standing right behind her mother just seconds before. In the time it took Margaret to turn back around, her daughter had vanished into a sea of 500,000 strangers. Margaret screamed. David started pushing through the crowd, shouting Emma's name. Tommy stood frozen, clutching his mother's coat, watching his parents fall apart in real time. Within minutes, NYPD officers were on scene. Within an hour, the New Year's celebration had turned into a massive search operation, hundreds of police officers flooding Times Square, checking every storefront, every alley, every subway entrance. But here's what makes this case different from so many other missing children cases. Multiple witnesses had seen Emma in those final moments. They'd seen her talking to a man. And that's when this story stopped being about finding a lost child and became about finding someone to blame. Because in 1977 New York, when a child vanishes and witnesses describe a shabby-looking man talking to her, the city doesn't want a careful investigation. They want a monster they can point to and say, "There, that's who did it." The witnesses all described the same thing. A man wearing multiple layers of coats, carrying plastic bags, clearly homeless, talking to Emma near the corner of 45th and Broadway. Now, I need you to understand something about 1977 New York. The city was drowning in crime, the homeless population was exploding, and people were terrified. When witnesses said they saw a homeless man with a missing child, that wasn't just a description. It was a conviction. In their minds, they'd already solved the case. Police started asking around, "Who's the homeless guy that hangs around Times Square?" And every answer pointed to the same person, Michael James Porter. Porter was 41 years old, been living on the streets for 3 years after a construction accident left him unable to work. He wasn't dangerous, talked to anyone who actually knew him, and they'd tell you he was quiet, kept to himself, sometimes helped tourists with directions. But that night, none of that mattered. What mattered was that multiple witnesses had seen him talking to Emma, and when police found him at 2:30 a.m. sleeping in his usual spot near 8th Avenue, they found something in one of his plastic bags that sealed his fate. Emma's small American flag, the one she'd been holding when she disappeared. I've listened to the interrogation tapes. Yeah, they still exist in the archives. And what strikes me is how consistent Porter's story stayed over 72 hours of questioning. He said he'd seen Emma crying, looking lost in the crowd. He asked her what her parents looked like. She said her mom had a red coat. He was trying to help her spot the red coat in that massive crowd when suddenly people started screaming that a child was missing. And he ran, just bolted. When I asked former NYPD detectives why an innocent person would run, they said the same thing Porter said in that interrogation room. Homeless men don't get the benefit of the doubt. But here's where this case reveals something dark about how our justice system works, or doesn't work. The lead detective, Sergeant Raymond Mitchell, told reporters, "Homeless men don't just help little girls at midnight in Times Square." Think about that statement for a second. He wasn't saying Porter was guilty because of evidence. He was saying Porter was guilty because of who he was, because he was homeless, because he didn't fit society's idea of who helps children, and the media ran with it. By morning on January 1st, 1978, Porter's face was plastered across every newspaper. Times Square monster, predator in the crowd, homeless suspect in Nye kidnapping. The problem? There was no actual evidence. No witnesses saw Porter take Emma anywhere. No one saw him hurt her. The flag in his bag? He said she dropped it when the chaos started. That's why he picked it up to help identify her. No physical evidence, no confession, no witnesses to an actual crime. Just a homeless man who tried to help, and a city that needed someone to blame. After 3 months of investigation, on April 3rd, 1978, the DA released Porter due to insufficient evidence. But you know what's terrifying about this? The lack of charges didn't matter. The damage was already done. And what came next would destroy whatever was left of Michael Porter's life in ways that no prison sentence ever could. Here's what nobody talks about when we discuss wrongful accusations. What happens after? Porter walked out of that police station in April 1978, technically free, but in reality, his life was over. His face had been on every TV screen, every newspaper, every street corner in New York City for 3 months. People didn't care that charges were never filed. They didn't care about insufficient evidence. In their minds, the police had caught the guy who took Emma Clarke, and some technicality let him walk. That's the story they believed. That's the story that stuck. I tracked down people who knew Porter in those years after his release, and what they described is beyond heartbreaking. He couldn't walk down the street without someone recognizing him. People would spit on him, throw garbage at him, call him child killer, monster, predator. One witness told me she saw a group of teenagers pour a bucket of urine on him while he slept in a subway station, and people standing nearby just watched. Some even laughed. Other homeless people wouldn't associate with him because even they believed the rumors. Shelters refused to let him in, citing safety concerns for other residents. Think about that. A man living on the streets couldn't even access the most basic services meant for homeless people because of an accusation that was never proven. For 47 years, Michael Porter lived in the shadows of the same city that destroyed him. He slept in the same streets where Emma had vanished, carried the weight of a crime he swore he didn't commit, and watched the world move on while he remained frozen in that New Year's Eve nightmare. Former shelter workers I spoke with said Porter would sometimes try to explain what really happened that night, but nobody wanted to hear it. People don't want nuance. They don't want complicated truths. They want simple stories, good guys and bad guys, heroes and monsters. And once you've been labeled a monster, nothing you say will ever change people's minds. What kills me about this, and I mean this literally kept me up at night while researching this case, is that Porter never left New York. He could have hopped on a bus, started over somewhere nobody knew his face, built some kind of life, but he stayed. When I asked a social worker who'd interacted with him in the 2010s why he never left, she said something I'll never forget. He said if he left, it would look like he was guilty. He said the truth would come out eventually, and he needed to be here when it did. 47 years. That's how long Michael Porter waited for the truth. That's how long he suffered for trying to help a lost child. And here's the part that should terrify all of us. This isn't rare. How many Michael Porters are out there right now? How many people are suffering under the weight of accusations that fit a narrative, but not the facts? We love to talk about wrongful convictions, people who went to prison for crimes they didn't commit. But what about wrongful accusations that never lead to charges? Those people don't get exonerated. They don't get their names cleared. They just live in this permanent state of guilty until proven innocent, except they can never prove their innocence because they were never formally charged. It's a special kind of hell, and Michael Porter lived in it for nearly half a century. But what he did not know, what nobody knew, was that the one person who could save him was out there, somewhere, trying to remember the truth through decades of trauma and lies. October 2024. Michael James Porter is 88 years old, dying of stage 4 lung cancer at St. Vincent's Hospital in Manhattan. He'd been admitted through the hospital's charity program for homeless patients, one of those end-of-life care situations where everyone knows there's no coming back from this. The doctors gave him maybe 2 weeks. Porter had lived his entire adult life on the streets of New York, and now he was going to die in a hospital bed, alone, still carrying the label of child predator that had haunted him since 1977. That's how this story was supposed to end. A forgotten man, dying forgotten, with a crime he didn't commit as his only legacy. But on October 8th, 2024, something impossible happened. A woman in her early 50s walked into Porter's hospital room. Well-dressed, confident, the kind of person who clearly had her life together. She asked the nurse if she could speak with Mr. Porter alone. The nurse later told investigators that she thought maybe it was a daughter or relative finally showing up, which would have been nice considering Porter hadn't had a single visitor since being admitted. The woman sat down beside Porter's bed, and she said something that, if you'd been in that room, would have stopped your heart. Mr. Porter, my name is Emma Clarke. The little girl he'd tried to help 47 years ago, the little girl whose disappearance destroyed his entire life, was sitting next to him, alive. Grown, real. He tried to speak but couldn't find words. Emma Clarke was dead, had to be dead. Everyone assumed she'd been killed within hours of her disappearance. Missing children who vanish in crowds like that don't come back 47 years later. They just don't. But here she was, and she was about to tell Porter something that would finally give him the one thing he'd been searching for since 1977. The truth. Emma, Now Emma Richardson, living in Portland, married with 3 kids of her own, spent the next 3 hours telling Porter what really happened that night in Times Square. And I need you to brace yourself for this, because what she revealed is darker than anything investigators suspected back in 1977. She confirmed Porter's story exactly as he'd told it. She'd gotten separated from her parents, she was crying. Porter asked her what her parents looked like. She said her mom had a red coat. He was trying to help. Then people started screaming, and Porter ran. But here's what nobody knew. What changed everything? After Porter ran, another man appeared in the chaos. This man was clean-cut, well-dressed, wearing a nice winter coat. The kind of person who looks trustworthy, safe, like someone you'd want helping your lost child. He told 6-year-old Emma that he was a police officer and that he would help her find her parents. He said they needed to move away from the crowd to somewhere quieter, where she could describe her parents better. And Emma, scared and alone and wanting to find her mom, believed him. She took his hand. He led her to a waiting car on 9th Avenue, just a few blocks away from where 500,000 people were counting down to midnight. She got in that car because he looked safe, because he didn't look like a monster, because monsters, as it turns out, rarely look like what we expect them to. And what happened next, what happened to Emma Clarke over the following 18 years, is going to make you understand why this case isn't just about a wrongful accusation. It's about how we fail to see evil when it's dressed in a nice coat. Emma told Porter that for the next 18 years, she was held captive in a basement in Yonkers, just 20 minutes north of Manhattan, close enough that her captor could have driven past Times Square anytime he wanted. This man, whose identity Emma would only reveal to authorities and not to Porter, had created an entire false reality for her. He told her that her parents had died in a car accident, that he was her uncle, that he was taking care of her now. And Emma, 6 years old and traumatized, believed him. What else could she do? She was a child. Children believe adults, especially adults who seem kind, who provide food and shelter, who act like they're protecting you. He homeschooled her, never let her outside, never let her have friends, controlled every single aspect of her existence. Think about that for a second. Emma Clarke grew up in a basement in Yonkers while her face was on missing posters all over New York, while her mother cried herself to sleep every night, while her father's heart literally gave out from the grief of losing her. And she had no idea. She had no idea she was a missing person. She had no memory of having a brother named Tommy. Her early childhood memories faded, got overwritten by the narrative her captor fed her day after day, year after year. This is what long-term captivity does. It doesn't just trap your body, it rewrites your entire sense of reality. The man who took Emma wasn't some lurking stranger in a dark alley. He was a respected businessman in Westchester County. Married, community member, the kind of guy who showed up to neighborhood barbecues and charity events. Nobody suspected him. Nobody would have suspected him, and that's exactly why he got away with it for so long. He'd been in Times Square that night for the same reason everyone else was, to celebrate New Year's Eve. He saw the chaos when Emma went missing. He saw police dragging Michael Porter away in handcuffs. He saw the perfect opportunity, and he took it. While everyone was focused on the homeless man, the real monster walked Emma to his car and drove away into the night. In 1995, when Emma was 24 years old, her captor had a massive stroke. While he was in the hospital, ironically, the same St. Vincent's Hospital where Emma would later visit Porter, Emma found old newspapers in the attic. Newspapers from January 1978, with her face on the cover. Missing Emma Clarke. I cannot imagine what that moment must have felt like. Your entire reality, everything you believed about your life, shattered in an instant. She fled. Just ran. But here's the tragedy. She was so terrified, so confused, so thoroughly brainwashed that she didn't go to the police. She didn't know how to exist in the real world. She'd spent 18 years in a basement being told that her parents were dead, that the outside world was dangerous, that her captor was the only person who cared about her. Emma hitchhiked across the country, eventually settling in Portland under a new identity. It took years of therapy before she could even process what had happened to her. It took decades before she could say the words out loud. I was kidnapped. I was held captive. My childhood was stolen. And it took until 2024, when she saw a documentary about cold cases that featured her story, before she finally had the courage to come forward. The documentary showed Michael Porter's picture, called him a suspect, and Emma remembered. She remembered his face. She remembered that he'd been kind to her, that he'd tried to help. And she realized that an innocent man had spent 47 years paying for a crime he didn't commit. That's when she knew she had to find him. She had to tell him the truth, even if it was almost 50 years too late. Emma found Porter through hospital records and social services. Turns out, even homeless people leave paper trails when they're dying in city hospitals. She walked into that room at St. Vincent, knowing this might be her only chance to give this man what he'd been denied for 47 years: the truth. She told him everything about the well-dressed man who pretended to be a cop, about the 18 years in that basement in Yonkers, about finding those newspapers and realizing her entire life had been a lie. And then she said something that I think broke Porter even as it saved him. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Porter. I saw the documentary. They showed your picture. They called you a suspect. And I remembered. I remembered your face. You were kind to me. You were trying to help. And they destroyed you for it." Porter, barely able to speak through the cancer ravaging his lungs, held her hand. According to the nurse who checked on them, he was crying. This man who'd lived through 47 years of being called a monster, who'd been spit on and beaten and rejected by everyone, was crying because someone finally believed him. He whispered, "It's okay. You're alive. That's all that matters. You're alive. Think about that." After everything he'd suffered, his first concern was still for her. Not his own vindication, not anger at the years stolen from him, just relief that this little girl he'd tried to help had survived. That's who Michael Porter really was. That's who he'd always been. 3 days after Emma's visit, on October 11th, 2024, Michael James Porter died. But before he did, he gave an official statement to NYPD detectives with Emma present, confirming every detail of what really happened that night in Times Square. Emma confirmed his story. The story he'd been telling since 1977, the story nobody believed. The real kidnapper, whose identity Emma revealed to authorities, had died in 2003, never faced justice, never spent a day in jail, lived his entire life as a respected member of the community, while Michael Porter lived on the streets as a suspected child predator. That's the part that keeps me up at night. The guilty die comfortable while the innocent suffer. On October 15th, 2024, the NYPD issued a formal posthumous apology to Michael James Porter. Police Commissioner James O'Neill stood in front of cameras and said, "We failed Mr. Porter. The system failed him. He tried to help a lost child, and we destroyed his life for it. We cannot undo the damage, but we can acknowledge the truth." The media that had crucified Porter in 1978 now ran stories about the wrongfully accused hero. Emma gave a press conference, her voice shaking but determined. "For 47 years, an innocent man suffered because of what happened to me. He lost everything, and the real monster walked free. I want the world to know Michael Porter is a hero. He tried to save me. I just wish I could have saved him too." Margaret Clarke, now 85 years old, flew from Florida to New York when she learned her daughter was alive. The reunion between Emma and her mother, captured by news cameras, was both beautiful and devastating. 47 years of missed birthdays, graduations, weddings, grandchildren. Tommy Clark, now an NYPD detective himself, said something profound. "For 40 years, I've been a cop partially because of what happened to my sister. And one of the first things I learned was that the wrong people get blamed all the time. I'm ashamed it took us 47 years to clear Mr. Porter's name." Michael Porter was buried at Calvary Cemetery in Queens, attended by over 200 people, including Emma and the Clarke family. A small memorial plaque was placed at the corner of 45th and Broadway in Times Square. In memory of Michael James Porter, 1936 to 2024, a man who tried to help when no one else would. But here's what that plaque doesn't say, what we all need to remember. This shouldn't have taken 47 years. This shouldn't have required a deathbed confession. And somewhere out there, right now, there's probably another Michael Porter, someone paying for a crime they didn't commit while the real predator walks free. This case forces us to confront something deeply uncomfortable: how easily we destroy innocent people when the story fits our prejudices. Michael Porter wasn't arrested because of evidence. He was arrested because he was homeless, because he didn't fit society's image of who helps children, because we needed someone to blame, and he was convenient. The real kidnapper understood this perfectly. He knew that a well-dressed man in a nice coat would never be suspected, while a homeless man would be crucified on sight. He weaponized our biases, and it worked for 47 years. That's not just a failure of the justice system. That's a mirror showing us who we really are when we're scared and desperate for answers. I've spent months studying missing children cases, and here's what terrifies me. The Emma Clarke case isn't unique. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of cases where the first person blamed wasn't the actual perpetrator. We see this pattern over and over. Someone who doesn't fit society's norms gets accused, media runs with it, public demands justice, and the real predator disappears into the background. Look at the Central Park Five. Look at Richard Jewell. Look at countless others who were convicted in the court of public opinion before any trial happened. The difference with Porter is that he never even got a trial. He just got 47 years of punishment without any chance at redemption until 3 days before his death. Emma's survival is miraculous, but let's be honest about what it cost her. 18 years of captivity, decades of therapy, a childhood completely erased, a family destroyed. Her father died never knowing she was alive. Her brother became a cop trying to find justice for a sister he thought was dead. Her mother spent nearly 50 years grieving. And Michael Porter? He lost everything too. His dignity, his safety, any chance at a normal life, any hope that people would see him as human. 2 lives destroyed, a family shattered, all because we saw what we wanted to see instead of what was actually there. The real monster walked free because he looked respectable, while the man who tried to help looked homeless. Here's what I want you to take from this. Predators don't always look like predators. They look like your neighbor, your coworker, the friendly guy at church, the respected businessman at the charity event. They bank on our assumptions about what evil looks like. They know that we're more likely to suspect the poor, the marginalized, the people society has already decided don't matter. And they use that knowledge to operate in plain sight while we destroy the wrong people. Emma's captor went to that businessman's funeral in 2003. People mourned him, celebrated his life, never knowing what he'd done. Meanwhile, Michael Porter was sleeping on cardboard in a subway station, still carrying the weight of an accusation that should have never been made. The 1977 Times Square vanishing case officially closed on October 22, 2024, 47 years, 9 months, and 22 days after Emma Clarke disappeared. Emma is alive, rebuilding her relationship with her mother and brother, working through decades of trauma. Michael Porter is dead, finally exonerated, but robbed of the chance to live as a free man with his name cleared. The real kidnapper is dead too, having escaped justice entirely. There are no winners in this story. There's just a stark reminder that our assumptions have consequences, that rushing to judgment destroys lives, and that sometimes the person standing right in front of us trying to help is exactly who they say they are. We just refuse to see it because it doesn't fit the narrative we've already decided is true. And that should terrify all of us more than any monster ever could. So here we are, at the end of Emma Clarke's story. Except it's not really the end, is it? Emma is still healing, still processing 47 years of stolen life. Margaret Clarke got her daughter back, but will never get back the decades they lost. Tommy became the kind of cop who questions assumptions because he saw what assumptions did to an innocent man. And Michael Porter? He died knowing the truth finally came out, but he never got to live in a world where people saw him as the hero he actually was. That's the cost of rushing to judgment. That's the price of seeing what we want to see instead of what's actually there. I want you to think about something. How many times have you seen a news story about a missing child and immediately formed an opinion about who did it based on nothing but a description or a photograph? How many times have you watched the media crucify someone before any evidence was presented and you went along with it because it felt right? We all do it. We're hardwired to create narratives that make sense, to find someone to blame when something horrible happens. But Emma's case shows us what happens when those narratives are wrong. Innocent people suffer while guilty people walk free. And the scary part? This is still happening right now somewhere to someone we'll probably never hear about. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. Reserve judgment. Question your assumptions. Remember that predators rarely look like monsters. They look like everyone else. And remember that the people society pushes to the margins, the people we're quickest to blame, are often the most vulnerable to false accusations. Michael Porter spent 47 years paying for kindness. Let that sink in. He tried to help, and it destroyed him. How many other people are out there right now, suffering under the weight of accusations that fit a narrative but not the facts? How many real predators are walking free because they dress well and smile at the right times? Emma Clarke's case is closed, but the questions it raises will stay with me forever, and they should stay with you too. Because this isn't just about one homeless man in 1977, or one little girl in Times Square, or one businessman who got away with evil. This is about all of us, and how we see the world, and whether we're brave enough to admit when we're wrong before it's too late. If this case made you think, made you question, made you uncomfortable, good. That means you're paying attention. And paying attention is how we prevent the next Michael Porter from suffering for 47 years, while the next Emma Clarke disappears into a basement somewhere, waiting for someone to find her. If stories like this matter to you, if you want to keep learning about these cases, if you believe that the truth matters even when it comes 47 years too late, subscribe to Missing Innocence and hit that notification bell. Because there are hundreds of cases like Emma's still waiting to be solved, hundreds of families still searching for answers, and maybe, just maybe, one of these stories will be the key that brings someone home. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually. We just need to be willing to listen when it does, even if it shatters everything we thought we knew.